The first video that we're going to watch is going to be from BlackMaze, who, in case you guys don't know, is very much involved in the racing community. I think him and others started XGR, which was like the Discord and racing group that basically inspired CIG to talk about racing basically all of CitizenCon, right? Vehicles and talking about racing with the change to Loreville, all sorts of things. And this is his reaction to master modes and how I believe he thinks it's going to affect racing. I saw the members of the PvP community not being too happy with his reaction here. So let's see what he has to say on master modes and maybe from the racing perspective.
How will master modes affect the Star Citizen flight experience? That's the big question following the CitizenCon of this year, where the
Is my volume low? It
team
is. Okay.
explained how they plan to tackle high speeds in combat. There are a bunch of things still up for speculation, but there's a few things we know. Flight will be split up between SEM and QCM, and these are vastly different. SEM will see a hard speed limit that is the same for vacuum, thin atmospheres, dense atmospheres, and this is not something we've seen before. Additionally, the boost changes a little bit. Right now, all of the thrusters, the mains, the retros, the maneuvering thrusters, they all see the same multiplier when boosting. But in the future, only the mains, the rear thrusters, get a lot of power, and the other maneuvering thrusters are going to be a little weaker, so you can't lean down on them as much when we're boosting through the turns. It's going to promote more boost on the mains and focusing on turn and burning, if you can get there. QCM, on the other hand,
yeah, so again, like starting already out with speculation and like if you could get there, things like that. I think we need to start trusting the devs more, that they've put in the work, that they know what they're doing. Star Citizen has essentially created a situation where they make you feel like you're involved and that you have a say, and you don't. And that's the thing, is you got to let them do what they think is right and provide feedback once it's there. And, I bet you BlackMaze is right. I bet you if we watch an Avenger 1 video, he's going to be right. I bet you they're all going to know right from the onset that they know what they're talking about. But at the same time, I think, yeah, speculating on these things is a little dangerous. I know I don't want to be like full faith Star Citizen knows exactly what they're doing. They've never done anything wrong. Obviously, they've gotten pretty much literally everything wrong up to this point and have been iterating through it the entire time, right? That's how they say game development works. So they're probably not going to hit this one correctly, but this is literally what the community has been asking for, I'm pretty sure, the better part of 5 years. So
is kind of unrestricted, the way you're used to it now when you're flying around. The only caveat is no boost. Now, all of this is a big change for Star Citizen and how we experience flight. We're used to this really free and unlocked Newtonian flight model.
I also want to point out, he's showing, where is he? We're 1,000 meters in the air. And I guarantee if he flew over this higher altitude part right here,
no boost,
and didn't cut the clip before that,
now all of this is a big,
we would feel like we were going a lot faster than we were, right? So the feeling of movement at the lower altitudes when things are flying by you would feel a lot faster than the clip he just showed on the video.
Big change for Star Citizen and how we experience flight. We're used to this really free and unlocked Newtonian flight model, where an ace pilot can overcome the overspeeding risks and really become a better pilot, and we're losing that to some extent We'll have to see how this all turns out, but it does look like there is an awful lot of focus on securing that pace of combat. I hope they're not forgetting about the real flight experience that Star Citizen brings and racing.
BlackMaze, I got news for you. The real flight experience that Star Citizen brings is a combat experience. Racing is a section of it, but it is a combat experience first. It was always a combat game first, so that is where their focus is right now. But if we go back and watch the video, there was a section of the flight model reserved in a, what would it be called? Like a vehicle type, which would be a racing vehicle. So there's absolute opportunities to take racing vehicles and make them what they need to be, but it's a combat focused game first.
Of course. Think about approaching a space station. I like to do this pretty fast. You can still do this in QCM, of course, but I like to do a 180 turn as I'm approaching and burn to a stop. And that's not available anymore. I either boost,
or it's available in SCM and then you turn into QCM and then boost, right?
And I'm slow, or I'm fast and I can't boost. The truth is though, I actually like a non-boosted flight experience. One where you can always rely on your thrusters to provide the same amount of output. It's a lot smoother, it feels very immersive, and very enjoyable. So maybe there is something to this SCM and I'll just fly around in QCM? Without really knowing all the details, we have to give it the benefit of the doubt. And I've wanted to experiment a little bit.
Okay.
What would SCM really feel like?
If we have to give it the benefit of the doubt, we should give it the benefit of the doubt then.
Went in game and I've tried it out to the best of my abilities. I tried to replicate SCM and QCM. For SCM, I would put my speed limiter on at 300 meters per second, which is right around where I expect most ships will fall, and then I would boost, temporarily turn off the speed limiter so I could overcome the speed, and then as soon as I stopped boosting, turn the speed limiter back on.
Did they not also say that when we use boost, it's a limited thing and you will be able to go over SCM with it?
Let the speed bleed back and continue flying. For QCM, very simply, turned off the speed limiter and flew unrestricted without touching boost. What we don't know yet is whether QCM has any agility debuffs, nerfs, whatever you want to call them. I'm hoping not, because if so, forget about QCM altogether for a fun flight experience, and it'll only be useful for straightforward navigation. Here's hoping they don't touch QCM beyond it, but I have good hopes. Flying around in vacuum 0G is where SCM really hits hard, because in space you typically fly a lot faster. 300 meters per second is not fast, not even for a Pisces, right? You would go 400, 500, 600, but right now you can't. And so when I was racing around the Everest Harbor racetrack, for example, it felt very strange because you're very slow when you're not boosted, and then you have that really momentary speed increase while you're boosting, but then when you let go, you suddenly slow down again, which is not something we're used to in 0G. You're expecting that Newtonian way of flight. So having an arcadey thing slowing you down in space is very strange, very odd, and again, it'll really depend on how they implement this slowdown, if it's gonna feel jerky or really gentle, or what is the force? Is it your thrusters doing it? I hope it's not like Space Brake, because with Space Brake, you actually lose control of your ship while it's slowing down. So lots of questions there we haven't seen answered yet. Flying QCM then is practically what we're used to, but you don't have boost. So that's something to contend with.
Yeah, I mean, that's my big thing here is why are we ignoring the fact that like they've mentioned racing vehicles as a separate thing that have higher accelerations and more control and all those things.
Feels really nice, feels really smooth, and here's the interesting point. Racing around Everest Harbor, I was faster in QCM, 10 seconds per lap, because the increased top speed outweighs the little bit of boost you get around turns, because in vacuum it just doesn't make up for it. Having that speed limit.
I mean, no shit, I'm confused. Obviously, you would go faster if you go faster, right?
So low means that you are faster
Like the only situation where he was gaining speed was on turns.
in QCM as opposed to SCM. And that begs the question, is this what CIG intended? Am I supposed to be faster in QCM while racing around a track or navigating? What are we supposed to race in, SCM or QCM? Because traditionally, combat was considered very much related to racing, which I still believe, but then with these new modes, suddenly it wouldn't fit in the same category, at least not in a vacuum. Yogi Clot mentioned that he expects racers to swap between modes, which is another interesting fact and raises more questions. How does the swapping work? Am I doing this on the fly? Am I able to do that? Am I constantly dropping my shields, getting back my shields, turning on my weapons, turning off my weapons?
In the straights.
It all feels very arcadey, artificial, and a little odd. I'll have this restricted speed, and then suddenly I won't, and then I'll have the restriction again, and then I won't. But what if I'm doing 600 meters per second and then turn on SCM? How is that slowdown going to feel? It's going to be very quirky. Is the only thing I can really describe it as. And yeah, I've got lots of questions. But again, SCM, slower in vacuum than QCM when we're racing around. It's a big one to remember. Let's now go to a thin atmosphere, like the snake pit. It's a prime location. And this is interesting because flying SCM, we actually don't really go faster than the top speed in SCM. Not really. You're approaching a turn, you're just about reaching 300 meters per second, and I think
very fast.
This is exactly what Yogi meant, that if a track is tight enough, you won't even notice anything in SCM because it'll just feel really natural.
Yes.
This is how I experienced it. There are a few moments where you feel like your top speed is hampered while you're not boosting, but in general, it feels basically like you're racing like normal. Again, we don't know how the slowdown will feel, and that's something left up in the air for now. But when we go QCM, it feels again really nice. I've done some non-boosted racing before, which feels fun, but it isn't any faster. Simply again because you don't overspeed, you don't reach speeds higher than SCM would. So the track times are about the same. SCM was actually about 2 seconds faster if I was just running a few laps.
Oof.
Something to remember. So now we go to an Earth-like, a dense atmosphere, Hurston. Very close to an Earth-like. We've got the Lorville Gateways track there. It's a slightly larger track. It's got 2 straights, and not surprising, QCM out-won again on SCM.
Because it's got
With
more
SCM,
straights.
you often are waiting because you are locked in your speed limit. You don't have enough boost to go boosting around the track, but you are also not able to go any faster. So when we're flying QCM then, you don't have that limit, and around the straight, you're making up for the time that you are slower in the turns. And I just feel like they're too close. The two modes are too contested. It's like, do I want SCM or QCM? Or again, is there something we don't know? And Yogi has got to tell us.
There's something you don't know. There's 100% something you don't know, and but I think it's more known than you're making it. They're very like. This like actually kind of annoys me a little bit because this dude right here and his group are the most like precious, like my precious, you know, like this, like Star Citizen Racing is like, oh, my precious, my precious. Everything, like all they're doing is paying attention to this group right now. As far as the content that they're getting in the game, all sorts of things. Like people are really inspired by these guys, and I praise them for it. And the second somebody makes a change that may or may not be good for them, this video comes out. And to think that they were going to do a complete 180 and not care about racing or make a change that was going to negatively affect racing completely is not really a fair way to look at it, I think. Now, you may have a negative effect to racing for a short period of time, right? Where this work is focused on Squadron 42, so you may have a negative effect in your racing leagues and things like that for the moment, but when they go to flight tuning on racing ships, you're going to probably have tons of feedback, be able to share your experiences with the current system, what you like, what you don't like, and then start tuning racing ships in a really, really powerful and strong way. Yeah, the points that he's trying to make, obviously valid, but it comes down to, do you truly think that after everything that has happened over the last 6 months to a year with Star Citizen and racing, that they would be going through this and not have racing in mind? If anything, it's combat and then racing and nobody else in mind at the moment is how it feels to me.
Vehicle experience Steam has got to tell us, you'll be swapping in and out of these modes. But that's something I don't like. I want to do either, because it just will feel too gimmicky, too gamey if I'm popping in and out all the time. One time I have a limit, the other time I don't. It's gonna feel weird, and I just want one mode to work really well.
He literally can't have an opinion until we have our hands on it. That is literally you are not allowed to have an opinion if you have opinions like that, because that is really silly to say.
For racing and for
that's just dumb.
hooning. Let's talk about that. Let's go
You're
to
the
Daymar.
only person who can't have
it's
opinions.
a really thin atmosphere, and a lot of people in the community
like
are
that.
worried about hooning because you typically do it at a faster speed. For those wondering what is hooning, it means going across a planet really fast and just having fun roaming around and going at high speeds, turning around hills and canyons. And I gotta tell you,
Wait, they made a name for low flying?
still feels really good even in SEM. Typically, you're flying around 300 meters per second. There are moments where you're just waiting. You're sitting there at 300 meters per second and you're wondering, why am I speed locked? You know, it's a thin atmosphere. And if I just press QCM, suddenly I can go 600 meters per second.
Sounds like low flying.
Easy, but you lose that boost. So you've got, again, that balance. QCM feels great because you can go whipping fast, but you have to rely on your normal thrusters. Or SEM, you're a little slower on the straights, but you can turn around stuff quicker. Still feels arcadey, not what we're used to. They both feel acceptable, but it doesn't feel like it was built for the general experience of spaceflight or racing. It feels like we want to slow down combat, and so you're gonna have this speed limit. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't,
because that's what the talk was about. It wasn't about racing. It was about space combat. It was about general traversal. Like, if we slow down space combat, we have these issues with general traversal. We dealt with them there. We'll probably deal with racing later.
seem to fit really well.
Is
will
the
you
vibe
still
that
have
I got.
fun? Yes, you will find your niche. But we need some answers. So before we can really make a conclusion on whether this is going to be a big disaster or not, I think we need answers. Maybe we can get a Star Citizen live. Maybe we can get some more answers. And we really do need them. What are the top speeds going to be of these ships? Don't make a Pisces slower than a Razor. Don't make a Herald faster than an M50. All of these ships should be equally amounts of fun and have the ability to cruise around. A Pisces doesn't need to be slower, especially if we're talking about combat pacing and balancing. Why would a Pisces have to be slower? You would be applying even more artificial limits that kind of oppose the idea of bringing a balanced playfield. And you'd be nerving ships that don't need it because they are most likely already weaker. And a Pisces or any other relatively slow ship like an MPUV is still a lot of fun to race around these days, so be careful with that would be my recommendation. But we need answers. How is the slowdown going to be applied? Is it going to feel really jerky? Is it going...
Okay, I think that there's an issue here too. Okay, I mean, when I hear the things like a Pisces should be this speed because it's fun in racing, I think we have to stay in our lane, BlackMaze. Like, I think you have to accept that a Pisces is not a racing ship. And they will tune racing and make it nice, and they'll probably tune it with racing ships. And I would be really concerned if BlackMaze and other people who are into racing, like, we're starting to make ships that affect, and their role isn't racing, have it affect other aspects of the game where they become too powerful as well. Like, I think BlackMaze maybe has just like racing brain and that's it. And it sounds like it to me in this video in particular, that that's what BlackMaze does. And that's great. Have fun with that. But I don't necessarily see, like, will there always be racing leagues for things like the MPUV? I hope so. Of course I hope so. But the idea of putting racing first and everything else second is where I'm not, like, okay with that. Like, the MPUV moves cargo from maybe a place like this down to a planet's surface, or between ships, or between stations, or whatever. That's what it does. It needs to work within that role first, and then you can find a situation out there that is fun to race an MPUV. Maybe one day we can get, you know, racing engines or something like that. But it's got to be tuned for its role, tuned for what it does. Ships that are combat ships need to be tuned for combat. Like, I'm sorry, there was a P-52 Merlin was a big part of this video so far. Not a racing ship. Not a racing ship. Right? So now, with that said, something that he also pointed out in the video is that there are in-lore racing leagues that are combat focused as well. So there's that also. And I think this video that he made has to be made to be like, hey, don't forget about us. It feels like you forgot about us. I'm not sure. And to update his community and go, hey, I'm not sure if this is going to be good for us. I don't know what we're going to do going forward for racing. You know, all their tracks could be invalid. Like, there's a big issue for them coming forward, most likely, about how they're going to deal with things. Well, if I know XRG and or XGR or whatever, I'm stupid. I always forget the name. They'll figure it out. They figured it out so far, you know. And personally, I think racing in the current game not fun, because it was the way that it was back in like 2.4 or something like that, where I absolutely loved it, where, you know, you had an M50 and it just snapped like a Formula One car. That's sort of the racing that I'm looking for, and I don't have that in the game at the moment. So it's, yeah, I'm not as interested in it now as, like, for me, I really hope we get to the point where we're tuning racing ships to feel like Formula One cars. That's my hope. I don't know if I'm going to be right on that one, but I do think that so far this video absolutely needed to be made. So we have to take what BlackMaze is saying and understand the perspective that he's coming from. But the point of view that I'm trying to come from is he has to understand that this isn't a racing game, and that other things are more important first. And racing can get tuned in its bubble, in its vacuum, in a way. But it should not ever be the first focus of the flight experience team. I think they absolutely have to focus on combat, but have racing in mind. And I think that that's the point of his video, is like, do you have racing in mind? I can't tell.
Going to hamper your ability to control the ship, or will it feel really gentle? This is really important to find out, especially in
racing ships don't even need guns. I just got finished telling you that they do, because it's part of the in-lore racing stuff. So yes, they do.
a vacuum where it will already feel quite artificial. I can imagine they have thought about it because it's related to combat, but we have to find out. A really other big one again is QCM. I really hope we don't see any agility related nerfs there. Don't make the ship fly more sluggish. Don't apply limits to rotation, because as soon as you do that, and I cannot anymore fly unrestricted without any limits, I mean, disregarding boost for a second, I don't know. That will ruin things. But I must admit, I personally think we will still have full agility in QCM without any limits applied to the ship other than the fact that we can't boost. So I'm hopeful there.
But aren't the maneuvering thrusters going to be less powerful? Or not less powerful, but they're not linear anymore or something?
Answers. If I cannot convince CIG to take it gentle with this and to make sure we still have fun with the flight experience and with racing and to limit the limits, I think it's going to be my responsibility to my fellow spaceflight enthusiasts that we need additional master modes. I know they're not planned, but think about it. If SCM is meant for or focused on combat and QCM is focused on quantum travel,
yeah, I cannot convince does sound not good. That was a poor choice of words.
There's got to be a middle ground there.
This is where I don't know if it's true or not, but it's going to look to people like the ego has grown to be too large.
I feel like there's a gap. Think about something like PCM, performance control mode, something that is just not usable in combat. Let that be used to get unrestricted speeds and boost. Or even let it be a component that needs to be swapped out on the ground so you can't do it while you're in the air. SCM to me feels more like CCM, combat control mode. Give me SCM as a flight experience, fast, unrestricted thing, or call it PCM. Something to consider, but again, I think we need to realize.
Yeah, and then maybe only racing ships can go into PCM, so on and so forth. So yeah, I'm not entirely against this.
Take a deep breath and wait for answers.
Yeah, okay, good. And then a good message at the end. Take a deep breath and wait for answers. But at the same time saying I need to convince CIG. The video was weird, I would say. Maybe I'd have to watch it a couple times to truly understand, because I'm not part of the racing community, but yeah, it's there's no doubt that if I was a fan of racing, that I'd be like, man, did they have us in mind for any of this? Now I sit here as a non-combat player, not really interested in combat. I would say racing would be my secondary interest from things like the industry style of things. Have you ever tried to slow down a really big hunking ship, and move down to a from space maybe to an outpost on the ground? It's not easy to slow down without backstrafe, but they're trying to completely remove backstrafing from combat, and it will, you're gonna have to turn and burn, and it's not as simple, right? So so it'll take longer and all those things. I think, that's obviously a concern from players who are, maybe not interested in ship combat as much. Think about a miner who wants to run. Now their shields are down when they already don't have armor, shields, or a way to defend themselves. So there was a lot of unanswered questions in that. But guess what? One of the answers was, it's going to take a very long time for them to do this. So we're going to have plenty of opportunities to hear about more and for them to get into finer detail on different sections of the flight model changes. And I'm sure racing will be one of them. BlackMaze and his group have done amazing things, made amazing content, have put together racing leagues for all sorts of different things. And I'm sure CIG has them in mind.